the Fractal Focus G case. I'm going to go over how I used it in the build, all the quirks, all the good things. Let's get started. Some of the specifications: it comes with a 2-year warranty, and I actually needed to use the warranty, which I'll get to later in the video. It's a low cost even at MSRP, and I actually got it even cheaper. It does include 2 fans. I didn't use these fans, I swapped them out for something else, but it's nice to include something in there. It supports ATX, micro ATX, and ITX with standard ATX power supplies. Maximum PSU length of 230mm, GPU length of 380mm, and the CPU cooler height of up to 165mm. Start with the good aspects of the design, the function of the case. Overall, I think it's a classic looking design. I like the expansion bays on the front. That's the main reason I got this one. Also, the price. Don't expect the world of this case with build quality and materials, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I've built computers for a really long time. I have used cases that have very thick materials. In this situation, it's a cheaper case, it's going to be thinner. This is how it is. I would be gentle with the panel screws. I think I stripped one of them. With the side panels off and the front panel off, the structural rigidity is pretty decent. I was able to build in the case, move it around, and I didn't expect it to fall apart or anything like that. There was a little bit of flex when I was moving it around. I got through the build of the case without cutting my hands, and usually I get some micro scratches or cuts from cases, but in this situation, didn't have any of that problem. There is an internal removable 3.5-inch expansion bay setup, so you can have 2 different drives in there, but you can also put 2.5-inch SSDs, which I'm doing in my computer build with one standard size SSD. There is also an expansion bay in the back for one 2.5-inch SSD. You can have 2 external 5.25-inch expansion drives or whatever else will fit in those slots. I have a memory card reader and also a Blu-ray drive. It's kind of a nostalgic return to older computers. I like having those bays in there now. The PCI-e slot covers in this case are fully removable and reusable. They're great. They're high quality. I like them. Very nice. I've had cases that come with ones that are physically attached to the expansion bays, and once you've taken it off, it doesn't really go back in properly, but these ones are good. My old NZXT S340 Razor Edition case has a weird setup with the back PCI-e expansion with an additional plate that goes on there, and it just didn't work half the time. So in this case, with a very simple functional setup with thumb screws, PCI-e panels, and it just works. It's very nice. There are some quirks that I'll get to with fans, but they'll be later in the video. In the back, you have a 120mm fan maximum. On the top, you can have 2 140s or 120s. On the bottom, you can have a 140 or a 120. And on the front, you can have 140s or 120s. The case has a front panel with a USB 2 port, USB 3 port, and the audio connections with the power reset plus 2 LEDs. There is a bit of space in the back to run cables. I think it's pretty minimal. In this case, Molex and SATA connectors will probably be fine fitting back there. I didn't have any serious issues, but you just have to arrange things properly. A bunch of decent sized openings to fit cables like the CPU power cables, the front panel auto connector on the bottom, and a bunch of the side access ports, and then there's one on the top as well to fit various types of cables. And then you also have a really large opening towards the front of the case to just have cables in that area if you want. Let's get to some of the quirks with this case. I think the side panels should have been some type of mesh or just a solid panel. Might have even lowered the price a little bit. With this window, I'm personally not a huge fan of the windows, and in this case it's going to be a plastic or some type of plexiglass window. I've already scratched it up a little bit here and there. It is convenient sometimes to be able to see in there, but I think a mesh would have been really nice. The side panels are not flat, so if you're expecting to have flat side panels, it's not ideal. I run my cases usually on their side, and it works out okay, but yeah, I think flat panels would have been good, but then you lose some functionality of the case because it is not super thick, so having that additional thickness to the side panel does have a physical functional benefit to it. The case does have filters, but they're very difficult to remove for cleaning and such. They show in their directions to use a vacuum on the front panel, and that makes the most sense because it looks like you can't actually remove the filter from the front panel. The bottom filter is held on by simple metal tabs that are part of the case. On the top, it does include 2 filters that are shaped in the size of the fans. So those are screwed on if you want to remove them. Once your computer is fully built, it will be some effort for sure to remove those. So one of the spots on the top of the case for a fan won't work out if you have an external drive in the top bay. The two front fans use special long screws to connect to the case. I don't like how this is set up. I wish it would have used normal positioning and such to attach those fans. If you do go with other fans, you're going to have to make sure they're the same thickness. This isn't a big deal, but the internal metal shell for the front expansion bays can't be removed. So if you had wanted to remove that for some reason, it's not going to work out. In my case, I'm actually using those, so it's fine. As I had mentioned, there is a 2.5-inch SSD connection point towards the bottom and back of the case, but I don't know how any airflow gets into that spot, so you definitely don't want to use a high heat producing SSD back there. There isn't much space between the top and bottom of the motherboard if you use a full ATX motherboard and whatever else is in the case. So with the PSU on the bottom, just not going to have much space between the PSU and the bottom of the motherboard. And then on the top, if you're going to use a decent sized fan up there, I was able to make it work with 140 millimeter, but it will most likely depend on the shape and thickness of your CPU power cables. Let's go over the build process a little bit, things I went through to make this function. The case was missing a motherboard standoff. I have a bunch of screws and stuff from old computers, so I didn't have an issue finding a replacement that works well enough, but it's pretty bad if someone is getting their first computer and they don't have a standoff to properly fully, hold the motherboard in place. It's not a huge deal considering so many screws go in there, but I think it would be good to have the full complement. So they included a little screwdriver thing for the standoff, so that's pretty neat. And then it's got the right shape, so that's cool. And then you just use a normal screwdriver on that. The biggest issue I had is when I connected the USB 3 front panel header from the case to the motherboard. I decided to swap it for the other one at one point, but it was extremely difficult to remove. I had to pull out two little screwdrivers, flathead screwdrivers, and then try to get it out of there. And thankfully it did not damage my motherboard, but I totally destroyed the front panel connector for the case. I contacted Fractal. They were very polite, very helpful, and they sent me a replacement. It was an ordeal getting that connector out. I'd be very careful with that front panel connector, and once you put it in there, probably don't want to remove it. But I decided to use this extension I had purchased that has a conversion from the USB 3 to USB 3.1, which is a totally different connector. It's much easier to use, and then I don't have to directly connect the case's header to the motherboard anymore, and that works fine. It functions. And then that way I was able to use my memory card reader with a standard USB 3 connector into the motherboard, and everything works fine. But overall support from Fractal was very good. I got the front panel port replacements from them. It was very easy to install. You're gonna have to take the actual front panel of the case off, and then there are two standard size case screws. Remove those. Obviously get all the cables out, and it's all one piece. All the cables and everything are soldered to that front panel with the USB ports, but very, very easy to remove and install. No issues with that. And then you just got those two screws to reattach the new one. All that said, considering this is a very low cost case, I think it's fine. There are a bunch of quirks, and it's just based on you get what you pay for a lot of the time. But in this situation, you're getting a decent amount of support. You're getting a relatively nice quality case, considering the price, obviously. Higher expensive, nicer case is going to be nicer, but this is good enough for me. It holds my computer components. It's functional. Everything works. Having those external 5.25 drives is awesome. That was the main direction I wanted to go with this computer, and that case made it happen. My rating would be overall not bad with decent support from Fractal. Yeah. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this look at the Fractal Focus G case in black. It's kind of tech, I suppose. Thanks.